Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us in today's water webinar, Agro-Industrial Futures, Scaling Alternative Water Solutions in Agriculture. Agriculture and agro-processing are among Africa's most water-intensive industries, yet these sectors are also at the forefront of some of the most promising innovations in water reuse, circular systems, and off-grid supply. In today's strategic discussion, our esteemed panel of experts will explore scalable alternative water solutions and strategies in driving food production and enhancing agro-industrial resilience. With that being said, I'd like to kindly introduce our moderator for this session, Ms. Dr. Mampefo Twala, the Water Sector Manager for EOSITA. Thank you so much, and please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Elisa, for the kind introductions. My name is Mampefo Twala. I'm very honored to be leading us in today's proceedings in this exciting webinar. Alternative water solutions in agriculture are critical for environmental health and sustainability, as introduced by Elisa. Through more efficient and water usage, farmers can actually grow better yield crops while using less water. Preserving one of nature's most important resources, we all know water is life. These solutions have been successfully piloted across the region, and also they've demonstrated significant potential for wider adoption. But it is believed that scaling requires comprehensive approaches, addressing financial, institutional, technical, and smallholder farmers have been at the forefront of this challenge. I would like to take us through this topic, and to help me unpack this, I've got a wonderful panel of experts whom I'd like to introduce onto the stage to introduce themselves, kicking off with Daniel, please.
Thanks, Mampefo. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I represent New Foresight, and we are a strategy consultancy that's specialized in driving a transition towards sustainable markets. So we work a lot in terms of how do we change systems towards a more sustainable outcome? How do you develop business cases around sustainability that's really grounded in being commercially viable and market-driven solutions? And a lot of that work has also been in water, working with governments and with companies in terms of how can you actually move towards more commercially viable business models working on water, especially also in agricultural supply chains. So that's what we'll talk a bit about today.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And up next, I've got Nozipho Soga, the founder and managing director of Reajala. Nozipho, could you kindly introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Mampefo. My name is Nozipho Soga, and I am a director and founder of Reajala Veggies, which is an agribusiness focused on sustainable vegetable production. I'm also a managing director of a dairy farm that's focused on the production of Ayrshire milk production. And through my work, I've seen how smart water practices can make agriculture more resilient, and especially in contexts where resources are limited. So I'm excited to be part of today's discussion and share some of the lessons I've learned on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nozipho, and Mulatelo Motau from Heineken Beverages.
Thank you very much, Dr. Twala. My name is Mulatelo Motau. I'm from Heineken Beverages within the Sustainability Division. So I'm the Sustainability Manager. And at Heineken, we've got a strategy that we are following, which is brewing a better world, water being one of the most fundamental pieces of it. So we have water targets for 2030 that we are working towards within our breweries, externally, and even within our value chain, which is agriculture is part of it. So I'm really looking forward to the session to be sharing on what we're doing and how we're tackling those important issues around water.
Thank you very much, Latelo. As you can all see, we really are honored with this esteemed panel that is going to be taking this session with us. I would like to kick off with a question for all of us, and I'm going to have a round of of answers from all the members. When we look at the topic at hand, what are the biggest barriers to scaling alternative water solutions across Africa, and how can collaboration between large-scale agro-processors and smallholder farmers address them? I would like to start off with Nozipho.
Okay, so I would say a major barrier is definitely cost. A lot of technologies are very capital intensive, and a lot of farmers, especially smallholder farmers, cannot access these technologies because of the finances behind them. Another barrier is also information around the technologies that are available to farmers and alternatives that are within their reach.
Thank you so much. Cost and also information. Very interesting to hear that. And Mulatelo, in the Heineken space, are you guys seeing similar challenges, or are there any other challenges that you can add?
No, certainly, like Nosipo has said, I think within the value chain, what we've realized is that there's a lot of hesitance when it comes to buy into alternative technologies or doing things differently. People still prefer to do things the traditional way. Also, from a technology point of view, some of the technologies, Nosipo has said this, they're quite expensive. So financing of those technologies, people are not aware on what financing mechanisms are there for them to then get alternative technologies within their value chains. Also, I think in terms of the efficiencies on how this can assist with efficiencies, people have not tapped on that and understanding that how this can assist them in the long term. So those are some of the barriers that we are seeing, which is most of them are there around knowledge within the space.
Daniel, in your space, are you seeing different barriers, or are they similar?
Yeah, thanks. So maybe I want to take a step back and explain a bit where also our experience comes from. So we've worked, we started in the beginning working especially with the Dutch government, who is one of the biggest donors on water projects globally, right? And one of the big issues were there's actually a lot of funding going into water solutions, also in agricultural supply chains. But often after that grant funding or government funding disappears, typically there's not a interest from the market, from private sector in terms of continuing to work on these different solutions. And why is that? Well, it obviously differs for the different supply chain actors, but generally there is not a commercially viable model sufficiently, right? So if we talk about the agro-processors, so actually in a South African setting, a few years ago, the IFC published a report, basically found you could reduce across the agro-processing industry in South Africa the water footprint by around 30%, with only around, and I'm going to say only in quotation, $250 million, which actually is not a lot if we're talking in a country that has such a big issue in terms of water availability and a water gap also in the long term. But the issue is that, yeah, it is expensive for individual agro-processors to adopt these more innovative solutions, and actually the business benefit is very marginal, especially because often the cost of water, the water charges are so low that actually most companies are better off just overspending water, right? And doesn't necessarily have a long-term view in terms of the water scarcity that will inevitably hit businesses. And I think if we talk more about smallholder agriculture and farmers, yeah, I think too often, especially the downstream actors, so both the agro-processors, but also the manufacturers, the brands, everything, they expect their suppliers, including the smallholder farmers, to just adhere to sustainable standards. They push whatever certification down or up the supply chain, right? There's not actually enough support for farmers to adopt new practices. So if we say that large-scale agro-processors cannot actually make a business case for adopting more efficient water practices, how can we then expect smallholder farmers to do the same, right? And one of the big issues is that there is not enough support along the supply chain in terms of how do smallholder farmers actually make that transition.
Well, thank you so much. And obviously, these challenges are something that we've all been living with across the different companies, right? And even across different organizations. Now, to just look towards more solution orientated. And if I kick off with you, Nozipo, from your own experience in agri-production, what has worked best when adopting water smart farming practices? And can you share insights from Riajala, peri-urban farming projects on implementing smart water reuse system to combat local scarcity? What has been your experience in the space? And as a small business, how are you guys navigating?
So the solutions that we found to be most effective are those that are practical for us as farmers and also that are suited for local conditions. For example, you mentioned that we're in a peri-urban area, so we have limited access to water. So we've had to be very intentional in how we utilize our water. And so we utilize a borehole system. We draw water from the borehole. And one of the shifts that we've implemented is a closed loop water system where we try and recycle and reuse water. So we'll channel water from our vegetable processing and then channel it into our irrigation system. And also on the dairy, we've also channeled water there into a manure pit where we then mix the manure with water and then channel it to the vegetables. So this has really reduced water usage, the recycling of this water. And we've also incorporated drip irrigation and mulching. So with our drip irrigation, as you know, drip irrigation takes water directly to the roots of the plant. So you're reducing the wastage, also evaporation losses, and mulching then stores moist, makes the soil moist for longer. So all of these practices have really helped in helping us use less water as possible. And we've also been harvesting rainwater through small storage and harvesting units. So these small practical implementations have really helped us minimize our water usage as best we can.
So basically, diversification and using a combination of water use efficiency strategies, from what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Mulaptelo, over to you. In terms of Heineken Beverages has significant water needs in its production value chain, right? And just to explore a little bit from your experience and perspective, what are the most effective sustainability practices the company has implemented to ensure responsible water use across both production and supply networks?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Dr. Tola. I think as a Heineken, we all know that the brewing process takes a lot of water. And what we have done is that we've come up with a strategy, the Brewing a Better World strategy for 2030. And this strategy sets us apart as leaders within the water stewardship space, especially considering that our processes from producing the wine, the beer, they take a lot of water. So from my perspective, there are three sustainability practices that stands out for me at Heineken. One is on water efficiency in production. We've committed to reducing our water usage per hectoliter in our brewing processes, where we have implemented advanced water reuse and treatment technologies across many of our breweries, where we are targeting to reach about 2.6 hectoliters in water use in water-stressed areas, South Africa being one of them. And this is across all Heineken OpCos in the world. So we've got this target that it needs to be 2.6 hectoliters of water that we use in water-stressed areas by 2030. Some of our facilities already are reusing water in their processes, water for cleaning and utilities. And we are dramatically lowering our freshwater withdrawals through these processes. Another second important factor, in Heineken world, we call it water balancing. Some would call it source water protections, where we are looking at water beyond our factory fences, we work closely with stakeholders to protect watersheds around our breweries and around our watersheds. In South Africa, we've partnered with different NGOs, water bodies, even with the government, where we have rehabilitation programs. Some include protecting wetlands, removing alien invasive species, but then also we also pushing for the protection of catchments, so water from source, because then we do understand that if we don't protect water from source, we'll never have that water. So if we do all the things right within our breweries and leave the sources the way they are, at some point we're going to run out of water. So it's also very fundamental that you look at water beyond what you're doing in the brewery. But then because of we are a company that's really reliant on agriculture, especially from our wines and then from our barley and other hops, so we really make it intentional that we engage our suppliers from an agricultural practices within the agricultural practices. So what we do is that we support sustainable water use at the farming level, especially for key ingredients like barley and hops. This includes agricultural smart agriculture within our farmers, where they'll use things like drip irrigation practices. We also help farmers improve their yields while reducing water consumption. So overall, we have two approaches, and our approaches is within our breweries, where we are aiming for operational efficiencies, but then also having that environmental impact externally, which impacts the communities and everyone else. So that's a bit that we are doing within Heineken.
Thank you so much, Mulatelo. I'm hearing a lot of source-directed measures and also stewardship and partnerships geared at collaborating with all stakeholders affected and interested. Daniels, over to you. In terms of adapting to water scarcity in Africa, would you say there is any incentives for alternatives for water sources for helping agro-processors to remain competitive? What would be your view in terms of incentives?
Yeah, thanks for this, Mapefo. I mean, I think first of all, we heard some really nice examples now from Nosipho and Mulatelo in terms of actually some of the concrete practices that farmers are doing differently, right? And also that is happening at sort of an agro-processing or manufacturing level, right? And I think they're really great examples of how actually you can make more of a business case, and even within the farm or the production side, that there are internal incentives as well, right? Financially as well. But I think in general, we're seeing a bit of a trend. I mean, I work a lot also with international supply chains and also in terms of agriculture, right? And one of the challenges in the past is that in a lot of these agricultural supply chains, water has not necessarily been a material issue for the downstream actors. It's not really been top of mind. It hasn't really impacted their operations. I mean, it's starting to impact operations, but I think also more importantly, especially at a European level, when now we talk more international supply chains, there is a lot of changes regulatory in terms of the regulatory frameworks, where now actually you have the CSRD, so the reporting directive, where companies now need to report on their double materiality, which also includes water, right? And now suddenly it becomes more of a material issue. It's part of the EUDR. So even though that's the deforestation regulations, actually water is also an important element of the legality principles in that. And some of the other upcoming regulations also have elements of water into it, which means it's becoming more sort of top of mind of the retailers, of the brands, of the manufacturers, right? And that in turn is the drive we need to even be able to in the first place move towards more incentives in the supply chain, right? Coming back to your original question, I think what we're seeing is, well, there are some solutions sort of slowly coming out in terms of these incentives, but I think it's still lacking too much. I mean, typically companies in the supply chains will, as I mentioned earlier, will try and push certification whether that is Global Gap, whether it's AWS, whether it's Rainforest Alliance, all these different ones. And I mean, the financial incentive in terms of the actual premium system is too small to really make an impact, right? And it definitely doesn't outweigh actually all the bureaucratic pressure on producers, on suppliers to adhere to these standards. So I think we still need to do more, and it's important to get more of that angle in terms of how do you create that business case? How do we actually support suppliers who do water footprinting, who actually show an effort in terms of reducing their water footprint? How can we actually reward that behavior in terms of changing that, right? Also from the other supply chain actors. And there are many benefits to that, right? I mean, I don't want to now, it's not to call you out, Mulatello, right? But how can Heineken also support its suppliers to reduce the water footprint, which in turn also has an impact on all the commitments of a company like Heineken, right? So it's not just to do it out of your good heart. It actually supports a lot of, business commitments. It reduces a lot of risks in the supply chain. And I think we need to work more on those solutions to create more incentives though.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It would be quite interesting to hear maybe later on if you can touch on some of those incentives that we are seeing trickling from international into South Africa, if you are seeing any positive adoption of some of those. Mulatello, just to follow on Daniel, just as is mentioned Heineken, and maybe if you can just share with us, the beverage sector has often been a pioneer in water reuse and circular systems, right? So what lessons can agriculture and agro-processing draw from beverage industry practices to accelerate adoption of smart water solutions, in your view and also in your experience as a company?
Yeah, I mean, we've led the beverage sector, and I think it's very important, but simply because of the value chains that we have, and it's also a necessity. From us, what is very important from being a front runner is that water reuse and circular water systems are very important, as does, also there's several key lessons from an agriculture and agro-processing that they can draw from this. I think from looking at water, how we need to treat water as a strategic asset, not as a utility. In the beverage industry, we've learned to embed water management into our business strategy. Like I said, we've got the Brew a Better World strategy. So water is really the core of our strategy. And not just from environmental compliance, because often people just do it from environmental compliance, but then you need to realize that it needs to be critical within your strategy, because then without water, you do not have, you cannot function as a company. And from an agriculture and agro-processors, they can benefit from this. They need to shift their mindsets in the same way. So they need to invest more in water reuse, precision irrigations, and other forms of technologies that are there. And also we need to, our decisions, we make them based on data. So we do analysis in terms of if the brewery is in an water stress area. So we've adopted those measures. So we have adopted a lot of those measures within our businesses. So I think this is one key thing that agri-businesses, they can then take. They need to start making data-driven decision making. And from our industry, we've also looked into smart metering, real-time monitoring, especially from projects that we implement externally with the water leaks. So we've implemented some technologies to see where the leaks are, and then how do we best fix them. So those are some of the things that they can look into. But then, like I said earlier, we've also built wastewater facilities. So we've looked into our value chain. Where are the biggest waste stages? So I think from an agricultural point of view, they need to also start looking into how do they build circularity into their designs. In our breweries, we've designed processes to reuse water for multiple purposes until they get to the final discharge. And this is something that agro-processors can follow suit on. They need to start looking into how do they capture water from washing, cooling, or steaming processes and reusing it in a closed loop system. But then also we're not just leaders in the space because of we are leaders. I mean, we've taken an approach where we have invited others. Partnerships in terms of local, water stewardships are very important to understand what are other people doing within the industry. How do you best collaborate with them? What are the technologies that they're using? How can I replicate those technologies within my space? So it's always important that you partner and understand what others are doing. And like I said, water is not a space where we can compete. It's a space where we can really collaborate because it's something that impacts everyone. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mulatelo. So true indeed. Water is essential to everybody. And really, if we can join hands and work together and learn from one another, that is quite meaningful, and it can also scale our efforts collectively instead of individual attempts. Nozipo, back to you, and just to link to the data that both Molatelo and Daniel have briefly mentioned. In your experience, what data-driven tools or technologies have you successfully scaled, and water reuse in agriculture? Could you share a little bit from your space?
Okay. So I'm going to speak on some technologies that we utilize and some that I'm familiar with other farmers that utilize as well. But we've found that the technologies that are very impactful are those that make decision making for farmers simple and accessible. For example, you have soil moisture sensors, monitors, and these really help farmers to irrigate only when the crop requires water. So these sort of technologies really assist in limiting unnecessary wastage. And another technology that's very accessible also to smallholder farmers are low-cost water meters. So these really help a farmer, track and know how much water they're using, and it also helps them really plan around their irrigation. As much as there are those advanced, more expensive water meters, there are also ones that are more basic and accessible to smallholder farmers. So there are a few technologies that smallholder farmers can be making use of. Another thing that smallholder farmers can be using now are apps. There's remote sensing and satellite imagery that are now accessible to us farmers, because if you have a smartphone, you can easily access these apps that help you monitor crop stress and soil moisture and evaporation and so on. So a lot of these technologies, I think there's a myth around them that they are so advanced and so unreachable that a lot of farmers are failing to adopt them, but they are ones that are accessible to us.
I like that you mentioned something so practical as a smartphone, which most people now have, Nozipo. And just while you're still on the podium, could you share any lessons from integrating approaches such as drip irrigation, shade net cultivation, or dairy operations with water reuse strategies that you may have used in your space?
Okay, so with drip irrigation and shade net, utilizing shade nets, they've also really helped in reducing cost as well. So with drip irrigation, we're using less water, and us reusing the water has also allowed for us to increase yields while using less water. A key lesson from the reuse of water has been the importance of using filtration units, because any small particle can clog the drip lines and so on. So it's very important to invest in low-cost filtration units that can, and also manage and maintain the drip irrigation system. So water usage has dropped significantly because of drip irrigation, and shade nets as well, because the plants are not getting as much heat stress because of the shade net. Also, you don't have as much evaporation losses, so you're really able to increase yields while using less water. Another benefit from the shade net is really the uniformity of crops, which also boosts the market value of your crops. So some of these have been essential also on our profit margins. And then, as I mentioned, the closed loop system has also really assisted us in using less water. So those are the main technologies that we've adopted.
Thank you so much, Nozipo. And maybe another food for thought for later would be maybe to share on some of the platforms that you are on, where you share lessons with fellow small farm holders and so on. That would be useful to our audience. And now, looking ahead, and this is a question I'd like to pose to all of you. If there was one immediate action or solution you believe the agriculture and agro-processing sectors must prioritize to safeguard water security in the next 5 years, what would that be for you, Mulatelo?
I think for me, one key thing is that agricultural value chains, they need to start doing water audits, understanding where they're using a lot, and that will also help them in terms of what form of technologies or solutions will then be needed within their value chains. I mean, from me, I'm really biased towards water treatment plants because of where we come from. But then those are also capital intensive. So I think they need to find solutions that speaks to them and then do a lot of research and also be bound or open to technologies being introduced within that space.
Thank you, Mulatelo. Daniel, in your view, any immediate actions in the next 5 years?
Yeah, thanks. So one immediate action, that's a big ask to come up with just one thing. So I'm going to make it a bit of a bigger thing maybe, but also before you ask for a few more sort of concrete examples of what are those incentives or what actually supply chain actors can do, right? So especially when we talk about downstream actors that have water risks in their supply chains, right? And where typically it doesn't happen in their own operations, but at the level of their suppliers. I think there is a big need for businesses to understand how can they best support their suppliers in adopting more efficient technologies, changing practices, right? Nusipo mentioned that actually there are some very simple practices, especially in agricultural production, that doesn't even need to cost a lot of money. So that's simply about just building the understanding, training, right? Building the capacity. And in some instances, with some of the more expensive technologies that needs to be adopted, I think supply chain actors can do a lot to create a more conducive environment in the supply chain, right? So it's not necessarily that they need to carry the investment, but how do you can generate more, for lack of a better word, security. So, for example, what you're seeing some European retailers doing these days is to move away from the annual tendering that is part of many agricultural supply chains to long-term agreements, 3-year agreements where you don't settle on the price necessarily, but you do guarantee the offtake for 3 years. You move towards joint business plans where you actually agree on what are the sustainability issues, including water in your supply chains, who has the responsibility for doing what are time-bound commitments for each of the supply chain actors, move towards integrating cost of sustainable production into the basis of price negotiations, and doing different elements on procurement practices that actually creates a more conducive environment for the suppliers to invest in sustainability, knowing they actually, if they carry the extra cost, they can actually still continue selling to their suppliers. It's also buyers adopting, preferential sort of supplier guidelines in terms of also actually supporting suppliers that are trying to make that transition. But also we see examples in terms of the incentives, for example, in soy. The Roundtable for Sustainable Soy is now actually piloting a new incentive mechanism for where the downstream actors pay a premium for farmers that are making the transition to regenerative agriculture, of which obviously water is also a big part of that, right? The same is starting to happen in cotton as well, where there will also be an incentive mechanism that is currently being developed. And there are other sort of outcome-based finance solutions, right, where actually we focus on suppliers who are able to adopt these practices. They are being rewarded for it. Now, coming back to your original question, so what is that one thing? Well, I think downstream actors need to really look in their supply chains and understand what are the main challenges with regards to water, and how can they support their suppliers to make that transition, whether that's capacitation, whether it's creating a more conducive environment, or however they can share that responsibility.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Nozipho, in the next 5 years, immediate actions in your view?
I would say the sector needs to prioritize decentralized water storages and harvesting, such as like smaller dams and rainwater tanks and so on. I think this will really assist in reducing the reliance on municipal water, and also just building resilience, especially in times of drought. I mean, we experienced a drought not so long ago. So I think that would be my main suggestion.
Thank you so much. I do have questions from the audience that I would like to now turn to. We've got Benoit Leroy, who's asking, is South African agriculture measuring embedded water and benchmarking against the best practices to lower sector water footprint? Any takers for the question posed in the chat? Daniel, I see you smiling.
Oh, that's dangerous. I need to, contain my face now. Well, I mean, let me try at least. Look, I'm not going to be an expert on all the South African sort of systems and everything, right? But
Yeah.
one, I mentioned a few times, one of the challenges being the way that a lot of downstream actors basically try to deal with their water risks is pushing for certification of various forms in the supply chain, right? And expecting that of suppliers. And it's difficult because many producers, many exporters, they need to adhere to several different certifications depending on who they sell to, right? And so sometimes they might need to comply with 3, 4, 5, 6 different ones of certifications, right? I think what's actually working very well in a South African setting is that you have CISA, so the Sustainable Initiative of South Africa, right, which basically is an equivalency. Well, it's not an equivalency mechanism. It's basically a certification, right, that does have an equivalency agreement with all the major certifications out there. And also a lot of those relate to water, right? And I think actually have, in terms of water, quite good criteria in terms of how suppliers, they need to do water footprinting and everything else. I mean, that in itself is a very good start, right? But it's actually also a thing that helps a lot of suppliers, especially also a lot of exporters, because they can adhere to the CISA standard and automatically then actually comply with all the various requirements from buyers that may, whether it's one requesting global gap, another one AWS, a third one Rainforest Alliance, right? So in general, I think South African agriculture is doing quite well in terms of measuring the water usage. Not necessarily sharing it, which is also an important thing, right? But measuring it, and also actually, I think reducing a lot of bureaucracy around water standards that you see in a lot of other countries.
Thank you for that, Daniel. I believe we've got another question from Craig Smith that is directed at Nozipho. I don't have the question yet in front of me, Nozipho, maybe just for you to get ready as we pull up that question, asking for support from Yolisa. Another question that has come through, and maybe Molatelo, if you may give this one a step. How can financing mechanisms or incentive structures better support farmers and processors in transitioning to circular or alternative water systems? How can financing mechanisms or incentives better support farmers? Molatelo, could you give that one?
I think from that question, I mean, the finance is very important within the space. So, I mean, it's very important that you are able to identify what form of financing you do would be suitable for your business. I think in terms of taking in technologies or understanding how best you can then use water, or what is best suitable technologies or solutions that are there for you, it's very critical, because without that, without the financing element, you're not able to get ahead or to advance within the space. So I think from a local level, it's important that we embed the education in people, or in farmers or different businesses, that they know what financing mechanisms are and what entails to secure those financing mechanisms. I mean, we've worked with people like the Dutch Embassy and the Danish Embassy. So they always have greater things, even though they look at but most of their financing would then be looking at the companies that are working within the space. But then how do you then use that funding or that financing to help other small players within the space? So they need to look at it and then also align themselves to people that it can potentially open doors or open opportunities for them to then access the funding. But then also, I'd really like to go back to what Daniel spoke about in terms of benchmarking. From our side, from the grapes and wines side, because we are a multinational, certifications and all that, so it's always important that we embed it within the farmers. They benchmark against the best. So what we are doing in let's say in Mexico, will then, if we have best practices there, we'll then try and bring them to the farmers that we are associated with in the South African context, so that they can adopt that. So best practices are always advocated for, and then amongst our farmers is something that we really push for.
Thank you so much, Mulatelo. And coming back to you, Nozipho, I've got a question from Craig Smith, who says, how do I go about informing agro-processors such as Nozipho about new technology with regard to irrigation water? How do I go about informing you about new technology with regards to irrigation water?
Okay. So, I mean, as an individual, we are available online and on LinkedIn and so forth. But I think if you're trying to reach a broader audience, it would make sense to approach your farming groups and organizations where such information can be, available to more farmers, and you can have a better reach. But personally, I'm online and on LinkedIn.
All right, thank you so much. There you have it, Craig. As we draw towards the close, right, I'd like to pose one or two more questions to our panel. And to all of you, right, which emerging technologies do you think hold the most promise for tackling the water scarcity, especially for farmers and in food processing? Which technologies, if you were to pick your top two or top three, do you think hold the most promise? Nozipho, kicking off with you.
I'm just gonna mention the ones that I've already mentioned. I think drip irrigation, smart water meters. I think those really assist us as farmers to plan better and irrigate and manage our irrigation well, and also reduce costs quite significantly. And some of these technologies are accessible to not only to commercial farmers, but to smallholder farmers as well. So I feel like those are two technologies that I would champion.
Thank you. Mulatelo, your top three?
Yeah, I mean, it depends with where you are in the value chain and what would work for you. But then definitely water meters are very essential. And then also, I mean, from treating your water, so the circularity of it. So that, I think, from a water treatment plants, if it is possible, that I'll then advocate for. But then also learnings. I mean, I've seen a lot of apps being developed where farmers can access what are the best water practices. So if that can be given to a lot of farmers from a local point of view, that could really be appreciated.
Okay, before I hand over to you, Daniel, just so that Nozipo can prepare mentally while we're hearing from you. Nozipo, you seem to be intriguing the audience. There's another question for you, which is saying you have mentioned that there was a drought recently, which means there was no rain for a long time. How did you survive in farming during this time, considering most farmers struggle during drought periods? While you ponder on that question, Nozipo, back to you, Daniel, and I hope I didn't confuse you too much there.
Thanks. All good. I'll speak slowly so that Nozipo has a bit more time to think.
Thank you.
No, so look, as Molatello said, obviously it depends on where you are in the supply chain, right? If we talk about farmers specifically, where it seems like there were quite a lot of interest also from the audience. Yeah, I mean, as Nozipo said earlier, it doesn't all need to be expensive and very difficult, right? There are some rather relatively simple measures that you can do that are very cost efficient, right? It's around cover crops or mulching to preserve just the humidity of the soils, right? It's around changing your irrigation timing to do it at better times of the day, right? Moving to more night irrigation, for example. It's around water harvesting, and there are quite some simple cost efficient measures that I think, especially when you talk about smallholder producers, can also adopt without too big challenges and also without having a lot of technical capabilities, actually.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and I hope Nozipo has got you enough time. But just as it's a little bit further, I can read out the question again. We've got someone who's asking you that you mentioned there was a drought recently, and which means that there was no rain. How did you survive during this drought period, basically?
Okay. So the drought period was a very difficult period for all of us as farmers. And we definitely experienced losses during that period. But all the practices that I've mentioned in this panel discussion really helped us mitigate some of these losses. You know, the storage of rainwater, our closed loop water system, mulching, drip irrigation, that assisted us in utilizing less water during this period and not relying too heavily on rainwater. But yeah, I think in any drought season, you are bound to suffer some losses, which we did. But we tried to manage the season as best we can through some of these practices that I've mentioned. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. And I think the question is from Judith. I hope you answered, Judith. We do have 5 more minutes or so, and maybe just to take from a few more questions from the chat. I've got Luyanda Ndlela, who is asking, are there avenues for nature-based solutions for treatment? Are there avenues for nature-based solutions for treatment? Starting with you, Molatelo, once again, then coming to Daniel. Nature-based solutions, are there avenues? Heineken, are you exploring any?
Yeah, I mean, for nature-based, it's always important to have nature-based solutions. I think from our side, what we've really considered within nature-based is looking at it from outside the brewery. Like I said, protecting our fresh waters and making sure that our catchment areas are clear of invasive species. So those are some of the solutions that we've looked at. And also protecting wetlands. What are the best nature-based solutions that we can implement? So we're always looking at what is best, and this is determined by the watershed or where the brewery is. So we are always open to different solutions that are there, whether they are nature-based or technical, but there is an opportunity to look into them, because then, I mean, this is a complex problem. You cannot just approach it from one angle.
All right. Daniel, any taking on the nature-based solution?
Nothing
No.
to add on top of
Nothing, any
Molatello.
on your side? No. All right. I'll move on to the next question. There is another burning question, and thank you, Yolisa. How cost effective are alternative water options compared to the normal water irrigation system? How cost effective is the alternative water options compared to normal water irrigations? And I'll open it up for any take-up.
How cost effective is the alternative?
Yeah. I don't know if Nosipo would really want to take it. But then from my space, what I've noticed is that transitioning to other systems is quite costly. So you need to be prepared. Hence, the financing is very important, and identifying people that can assist you with the financing. But then also you need to take into consideration that when you are transitioning, there are few elements that impact you. I think from our waste treatment plants, we've realized that you need to have reliable energy sources. Your infrastructure needs to be good. So those are some of the things that would really make the cost higher. Where you need to look at alternatives like using renewables within your systems. So sometimes it's very costly, but then, like I said, it's always important that you look at different financing mechanisms that can assist you, because then there's always a lot of people that are open, or a lot of organizations that are open to green financing, as long as you're transitioning to something that is better for the environment.
All right. Just to give Nosipo an opportunity, because I think you also do have some transitioning experience. Anyone that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the initial cost implications are quite heavy, but also as you're operating, you see a reduction in costs. So the long-term cost implications are then reduced.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that does bring us to a close of our webinar today. I thank you very much. From what I've heard from our esteemed experts, there's quite a number of things to consider. And amongst these, we've got collaboration. We've got collaboration, obviously, also partnering. We've got stewardship efforts, looking outside your boundary and looking what is happening around your operational area. We've got incentives that Daniel so generously shares in terms of incentivizing small farmers. We've got Nosipo's experiences in terms of closed loop systems and all the things that the wonderful things we had in today's webinar. I thank you very much on behalf of Water Security Africa, Inlet, and ESI Africa. We would like to thank you, our esteemed guest speakers, and the views from today's discussion. Also, the questions that came through from the floor. Please note that the recording will be made available on demand in a few days. You will receive an email with instructions on how to access the recording. Over to you, Yolisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Twala. Thank you so much to our esteemed speakers. This was really, really an engaging and strategic conversation. And you've taken the words right out of my mouth in terms of reminding everyone that this conversation will be available on live demand, and we'll be emailing the live recording. And please do not forget to check us out on all socials, Water Security Africa, as we'll be coming to Johannesburg this year, 4th to 5th November, for the live event. This is where we'll really go in intricate details around this topic and various other sectors that are impacted by water. So thank you so much to everyone. Have a lovely afternoon further, and see you in Johannesburg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.